Hi, I'm August Keller, and this is my review of A Quiet Place Day 1. So, I think this movie's pretty thin. I know I might be the bad guy here by saying I'm not that into it, but I think there's just not a lot here. The gimmick is kind of arbitrary. They have to stay quiet, but that really only affects the plot and only in detail. It doesn't really affect the bigger picture of the plot. I mean, the plot really just functions like a movie like, say, Cloverfield. So, the fact that these monsters are sound based isn't really that important to the story. It doesn't affect anybody's arc. It doesn't convey any themes because there isn't really much of either of those. On that note, the drama feels underdeveloped. There's a single motivation reveal where a character explains why they're trying to do what they're doing, but that reveal feels too little too late. And also the plot meanders. It really just kind of shuffles through monster disaster tropes, plot points that you'd expect, and kind of gets repetitive. Back to the drama, I think the script sets up some characters that go nowhere and then introduces a character later on and focuses on this relationship that feels mostly incidental and doesn't really matter. It feels kind of meaningless to their individual arcs. So the drama is more or less meaninless. There is something going on with the main character, but it's pretty superficial. The protagonists are more or less one-dimensional. They both have like this one trait that they establish, and that kind of just carries them through the whole story, which kind of gets boring. There's only so much you can do with that. Meanwhile, the world building and the monster rules remain vague. I know that was a major complaint with the first movie, and I don't think much is done to resolve that here. I also think there's a good amount of plot armor, so scenes that would be tense end up just kind of feeling like predictable filler. It's just like, okay, I know what's going to happen here. Let's get through this. And that's a lot of the movie. Really only the acting, primarily from Nyong'o, creates any kind of emotional investment. It's pretty impressive how she's able to elevate this material and kind of conjure emotions out of really basic plot points. There's chemistry and layers and distress by all the performers, not just Nyong'o, but it's really just from the performers, not from the script. So all of this is to say that A Quiet Place Day 1 feels kind of like a drawn out summary rather than a realized story. It's like I look back on it and I think not much happened, and it really is just kind of like a very simple story, and it just kind of feels like fluff. Technically, I think it's a pretty similar situation where it has all the competent pieces, but it also feels pretty flawed when it's all put together. So the tone feels pretty muddled to me. Like the horror doesn't really feel scary. The drama doesn't feel emotional. I mean, I feel like I'm supposed to feel scared and emotional in those moments, but I never really feel the intensity of either of those emotions. So it just kind of feels like foggy and distant. The cinematography has like pepperings of cinematic lighting and angles and framing, but that really feels like just seasoning. What really is the meat of the cinematography is just like drab colors, a lot of grays and dark blues, and it just kind of feels kind of ugly. It's a disaster movie, so you can say it's supposed to look like that, but it kind of gets tiresome to look at. The editing, I feel like as the movie goes on, it really loses momentum and really loses structure. It really kind kind of devolves into just blah, like there's not a lot of energy pushing one scene to the next. I feel like you could switch scenes around and it wouldn't really change anything. And I don't think that's a very good sign. You can blame that on the writing, but I also think that's an editing issue as well. The music is unimpactful. There's a closing needle drop, which evokes something, but that's about it as far as the music is concerned. The sound, as expected, is still central to the story, still central to the experience. It harnesses silence, quiet, as you might expect. A lot of genre elements like action and sci-fi and horror kind of sounds. And there's some subjective distortions like ringing and muffling. But I feel like that subjectivity is not as intense as it was in the previous film. This movie just has less emotions in general, so the sound is not as emotionally driven. The production design, I'm not a big fan of these monsters. I find them to be pretty mediocre. At least with this movie, there is a more sense of location. It's set in New York, and there's a bigger sense of scale. But even those are not that defined. It never really comes into play very much. The cast has a top tier talent in Nyong'o, and Quinn is an up and comer. But I do feel like neither of those are that exciting. I mean, Nyong'o, I do think Nyong'o is exciting, but there isn't a lot of depth here, and I don't know. I'm not that impressed by this cast. I don't think it's driving any kind of popularity with this movie. I mean, Nyong'o is great, and if there's anything to praise about this movie, it is Nyong'o. But I think she's more of an acting talent than a star, if that makes sense. And again, there's just not a lot else there. The CGI and special effects in general, there's more CGI than in the first A Quiet Place, but I also found it to be less consistent. Sometimes it looks really good, sometimes it looks kind of disappointing as far as detail and believability. So yeah, all of that is to say that I found A Quiet Place day one pretty forgettable. As I was driving home from the theater, I was already kind of wondering where the movie went. Why am I already forgetting it? What even happened? Did I feel anything? It just kind of feels like an outline, like a rough draft of a movie. And besides Nyong'o's performance, I really don't think there's much here that was exceptional. So yeah, I think it's just kind of going to disappear into the ether of movies. And yeah, I mean, I'm not saying stay away from it, but I'm not saying to go see it either. I think I'm pretty much indifferent towards it. I found it to be a bit of a shrug of a movie. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that. If you like what I'm doing here, please feel free to like and subscribe. I also have an Instagram linked in the description. And at the very least, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time. Okay, thanks. Bye.